Of the 20 Primarchs, Jaghatai Khan would come to be seldom spoken of by most. Breaking the fourth wall, if I may, I find this to be one of the greatest travesties in the Warhammer franchise, next to Erebus and Lucian not being dead. The Khan was a man defined by his discretion, and it's often misconstrued as him having nothing to boast about. The reality of the situation is a lot more akin to the Khan having no desire to tout his exploits because he knew exactly what he was. Well aware of his existence as an absolute force of nature upon a battlefield, he didn't bother being outspoken. There was no need for vanity to the Khan. He desired efficiency, and should the enemy underestimate him, all the better. While other Primarchs would busy themselves running their mouths, the Khan would be well on his way, having already run his opponent clean through. Jaghatai Khan never needed to make note of his ability, because he already knew he was just that damn good. You may have noticed now that each Primarch and their legion have a certain theme to them taken from our planet's own history. Whether it be the Nordic influences upon Leman Russ and his Space Wolves, the Roman motif of Robute and his Ultramarines, or even the parallels you could draw between Conrad and Vlad Tepes, everyone's got their inspiration. Despite his general preference for subtlety, the Khan is obviously a reference to the infamous Genghis Khan and his Mongol Empire. As fate would have it, the childhood and maturation of the Khans would be remarkably similar. Jaghatai would be cast to Chogoris when his brothers were cast across the galaxy in what would come to be known as the Scattering of the Primarchs. Chogoris was a planet that consisted of a single Pangea-like supercontinent under the control of a dictator of sorts called a Palatine. The Khan would be found in his gestation pod by nomadic tribesmen upon a massive grassy plain. Over the next few years, Jaghatai would be seen as a gift from the gods by the tribesmen who adopted him, until the fateful day an opposing tribe ambushed and killed his father. Jaghatai was no longer a gift from the divine. Instead, he was a lightning bolt of wrath hurled from the heavens upon those who slaughtered his kin. Putting every life to the sword for their transgressions against his people, Jaghatai and his warriors personally saw to the end of that tribe. Jaghatai would be given the title of Khan by his tribesmen, but this exploit would not be enough, for another attack could always come at the hands of a different tribe. The Khan would decide it best to traverse the massive plains, giving choice for all clans to become one or face his unforgiving blade. Eventually the Khan would rise to lead all the area's tribes, which is when fate would intervene again. You see, the Palatine would regularly send his armored regiments into the plains to torment the helpless tribespeople for their own sick enjoyment. But today was a different day, for the tribes were now one, and their unifier was at the helm. The next time the Palatine sent his men on a hunting trip, the Khan would make an example out of them. The only surviving member being a pitiful, mutilated soldier, sent back to the Palatine holding the head of his very own son, and a note that wrote, "Better fuck off before you get fucked off. Sincerely yours, Jaghatai." This would infuriate the Palatine, as he would send his armies to fetch him the Khan's corpse. However, the heavily armored troops would prove no match for the Khan's lightning-fast methods of war, and have their ranks quickly ground to dust. The Palatine would be terrified of the coming danger, and fled to his castle with what little guard he had left. And while the Palatine spent his time cowering, the Khan began spreading his influence. Giving a simple offer to every pocket of civilization he came across, the Khan would ask if they prefer to surrender or die. Those that surrendered would come to know a substantially better quality of life than they had experienced under their former ruler. Those that did not weren't really heard of again. By the age of 20, he had unified every civilization across the supercontinent. Well, every civilization except one, the Palatine's fortress. The Khan would set out toward the fortress with his war band, and upon arrival would extend a slightly different offer than normal to the citizenry. You may storm that castle and bring me your despotic leader's head, or I may do it, and take all of yours off in the process. I care not what you choose, as the outcome is all the same to me. A couple hours later, the Khan would take his position as the rightful leader of Chogoris without having to lay a single finger on the Palatine. The Khan's introduction to the Emperor was a very unique conversation. You see, the typical introduction went one of two ways. A Primarch would be awe-stricken and ecstatic to meet their family, or they would feel slighted as if they were being made a tool for someone else's means. Jaghatai would treat the meeting with his father like it was a business meeting between executives, bargaining with the Emperor before bending his knee. Initially, seeing a downgrade in his position, he was reluctant to align with the Emperor, but then the realization hit him. He wasn't meant for the lazy life of politics and governance. The Khan, at his heart, was first and foremost a conqueror, and this would give him the opportunity to live up to that like never before imagined. The Emperor would realize this as well. Whereas it was standard for a Primarch to remain under his tutelage for decades, the Khan was allowed to begin work immediately. Looking upon Chogoris, he knew anyone capable of this was more than ready to captain his 5th Legion. Upon the reception of his legion's forces, they were much alike him in preference, which makes enough sense as they were descendants of him, but each sect would be fiercely independent, having no desire to collaborate with one another, so the Khan had to step in. Calling down the mass of his legion upon Chogoris, they underwent a myriad of rituals and ceremonies. For lack of a better reference, he made them all go out into the woods and do team-building exercises. These exercises culminated in tasking them upon a series of lawless planets that would force their unification in order to achieve victory. The forces that emerged from these trials were a unified legion of trained killers, defined by their ability to operate with blinding efficiency. Despite finding brotherhood with one another, the newly dubbed White Scars maintained no desire to form close bonds with any other legions, and were often shunned as a result. Much alike their Primarch, they didn't care what rumors surrounded them. They preferred their solitude anyway. This propensity for isolation would prove beneficial by the time of Horus's betrayal. The initial confusion caused by Horus's deception proved disastrous for a great many legions, but the White Scars handled themselves expertly. At the time of the rebellion, the White Scars were preoccupied beating down orks when they received a constant flow of conflicting information from other legions. Instead of jumping to conclusions like everyone else, the Khan elected to wait for events to play out before action. Once again breaking the fourth wall, it is so refreshing that there was a Primarch who didn't sprint head first into the nearest assumption. The traitor Alpha Legion attempted to blockade the White Scars, but they got outclassed so quickly and so hard it was the equivalent to a bully puffing out their chest, then regaining consciousness on the floor. Jaghatai then traveled to the surface of Prospero to discern what has really happened, and the truth was revealed to him by an apparition of Magnus. Once the mingling with the apparition was concluded, Jaghatai would meet Mortarion upon the scorched planet's surface, and the Death Guard's Primarch would attempt to sway Jaghatai to the cause of Horus. After seeing the pathetic disappointment his brother had become, the Khan realized where his allegiance must lie. Even though he may view the Emperor as a tyrant, he was certainly the lesser of two evils when opposed by Horus. The two brothers would clash. The blows stricken between the two would result in a relative stalemate. Morty had become a chaos-fueled punching bag, and Jaghatai had to adopt the death by 1,000 cuts method. If you really had to pick a winner, I suppose it's the Khan, as Morty gave up and teleported out, but they both could have gone on much longer. Unbeknownst to the Khan, there would be a rebellion upon his flagship by one of his captains who mistakenly sympathized with Horus's cause. Naturally, Jaghatai was pissed, but his men being loyal to him first and foremost would recognize their error and fight on in his name. The White Scars would then spend the majority of their time crippling the traitor supply lines until the final siege upon the Emperor's palace. The involvement of the Khan's forces in the defense of Terra was much alike everything they had ever done. Faster than greased lightning. Jaghatai would prove vital in the recapturing of the Lionsgate spaceport and subsequently the defense of all of Terra. Screaming in like a sucker punch express shipped from hell, the Khan's surprise attack would gut the traitors' ability to provide reinforcements to one another. Upon expelling the traitors in the area, the Khan would once again cross blades with his brother Mortarion. Mortarion at this point is not just the gross, filth-caked hypocrite he once was. He had now accepted the embrace of the plague god Nurgle. Having capitulated to the Plague Master, he would outwardly reflect what he always was at his core, a pile of trash. Sorry if I sound different, I just ate an entire watermelon. So, The brawl that would ensue is top 5 favorite duels amongst Primarchs, not because of the combat, but it's because of the verbal interchange. It's downright cathartic to see Morty getting whipped into a rage by his brother explaining how much of a pitiful little bitch he is. Credit where it's due. Morty beat the shit out of the Khan for the majority of their battle, but Jaghatai kind of allowed it to happen. Morty would swing at his brother furiously, over and over, shattering his armor, spilling his blood, but he was never able to lay out the Khan. Morty is exhausted from teeing off on Jaghatai at this point, and Jaghatai is standing there, coughing up blood. But then Morty realizes Jaghatai is sitting there laughing at him. Morty asks between labored breaths why Jaghatai didn't attempt to avoid a single shot. Then the Khan just starts grinning ear to ear and drops a bomb on him. Jaghatai lets Morty know that everyone thinks he's a sniveling pussy for giving up and falling to chaos because he wasn't strong enough to survive on his own. And Jaghatai, by taking all of the punches until Morty was exhausted, has proved that once again, Morty is still pathetic with the effects of chaos, as opposed to Jaghatai having always been better than him. This enrages Morty, but now all of his energy's been spent, and the Khan just starts carving away at his brother with incomprehensible speed. Keep in mind, he's just throwing his body around at this point, because all of his bones are broken. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that Morty still has the durability of a well-done steak, so slicing him open doesn't really do much. Eventually, Mortarion would claim the upper hand and use his scythe to impale the Khan through his midsection. This is when Jaghatai earns the title of Khan Wick from me. Compromising his guard, allowing himself to be ran through with the blade, he would pull himself within a breath's distance of Mortarion. The Pale King would immediately realize his mistake, but it was too little too late. The Warhawk's twisted grin was the last thing he saw before the Khan struck and decapitated him. The Khan, through sheer force of will, would survive his grievous wounds as the war was brought to an end by the death of Horus. He would then be tasked to patrol the star systems around his homeworld of Chogoris. The White Scars, upon their return, would find their home system rife with the Drukhari, evil, sadistic dark elves taking advantage of their people. Jaghatai, upon this discovery, would begin his personal crusade to eradicate these hellspawn from the galaxy. The last we heard of him, he was in the webway beating the ever-loving fuck out of the Drukhari on his mission to kill the leader of their empire. And that brings today's discussion regarding our big ponytailed conqueror to an end. I think this pacing is better for future videos, still they'll start seeming a little bit more succinct most likely. But if you enjoyed this, feel free to take a look at the other Primarch videos. The playlist should show up in one of the corners. And if you like to vote on Final Four in future polls, hop into the Discord server in the channel info. Otherwise, thanks for watching and have a good night.